And boom, according to that, I am live. Welcome, this is Tokyo Tonight. Good to see Sergeant Bilko. Sorry I set this up at the last minute. But still, good to see people, I guess, rocking in a little bit. Some continuation of the stories from last week and some other news. Hopefully not too much. So, yes, remember, as always, as you rock on in, do say hello. It's nice to see who's there in the chat. And if you do, and if you would like to say hello to me or get my attention or ask for a topic or something like that, definitely do what Sergeant Bilko there did, which is not only saying my name, but saying it with an @ mark on the front, which is, let me just adjust camera, there we go, saying it with the @ mark on the front, that way it flashes orange like you can see there in the chat. And yeah, good to see. Looks like we have some more people rocking into the chat. We have Mr. Cordy Chip. What kind of black are we talking about? Well, you're gonna find out, I guess, pretty soon, and you'll never go back. We've got Brianna W. Nice to see Brianna W. It's a hen name I don't recognize. So always great to see someone new. And hi, indeed, welcome to the chat. We have Paragoti. Excellent to see you, and Believe in Yourself. Also excellent to see you in the chat. Yeah, it's been. How's it going for you all? It's been a lovely few days weather. It's been nice and warm. I've been jogging a little bit. I guess it's not quite helping with the suntan or anything yet, but I'm doing my best. I know it's been kind of tough in some parts of America. We've been following the news with the cold and everything. I hope everyone watching, if you're in the United States, is okay with that, and of course everywhere else in the world. Yeah, excellent. We've got Quint Rankid and Tudom. Excellent to have you and everybody else. Remember, as you're coming in, yeah, definitely say hello. And before we drop out, I just want to shout out once again that Aaron has been awesome. You probably saw there are a bunch of shorts cut out of the show that got uploaded last week. We were really thinking 3 was the right number, but yeah, she did such a good job. She picked out like 5 last week, so we uploaded them almost every day. And yeah, if you missed the start of the show and you didn't have a chance to go back, or you just want to see like segments of the show, it's actually fun for me as well, because I mean, they're digestible, they're really easy to watch, and it lets me actually enjoy the comments that you're all doing in the side right now a lot more easily as well. So yeah, I find them a lot of fun, and I do appreciate that. Yeah, Mr. Cordy Chip, did Naomi Osaka win today or yesterday? Spoiler alert, that was yesterday evening. I don't actually have that in the topics, by the way. I said I had a busy weekend, and I didn't watch it. But again, it was great. I'll talk about it now. I mean, it's just, she's like awesome. And yeah, I've talked before about, you know, the levels of awesome. I mean, it's this thing, of course, to sort of try to box her in. I mean, yes, she represents Japan. It's the nation, the nationality and nation that she chose for the tour, obviously. But yeah, you know, she obviously could have chosen Haitian. She could have chosen probably American. And, you know, I think it's great for Japan and everyone else. I mean, in the end of the day, I dislike the idea of being identified like tribally just by the nationality that you're associated with. Lately, I must admit, I'm feeling more and more lately. I watched a good movie a few days ago called Soul. In Japan, it was called Soulful Life or something like that. But yeah, the evil character in that is a New Zealand voice, and I must admit I heard it, and even like the New Zealand accent sounds really strange to me now. I mean, I know I've deviated from it a little bit, but yeah, I must admit I feel less and less connection to that, which, you know, is just, it's not a good or a bad thing. It's just says that I've just developed my own identity, which is separate. I'm sure that's the same for Naomi, but at the same time, you know, look, she's been raised and has become an amazing tennis player. And from that, there's just a lot of kids. There's a lot of kids with international parents. There's a lot of Japanese with Japanese parents who grow up outside of Japan. And, you know, there's a lot of people who, you know, I know what it's like growing up. Maybe more so for people around me than myself, but I guess I never felt the discomfort. That's why I'm living here. But people that, you know, when you grow up and you don't feel like you fit in with the image that you're supposed to be, that society tells you you're supposed to be based on your passport or based on your, you know, where you live or something like that. And at the end of the day, I think you learn at a certain point in life, it doesn't matter, right? You just are you. It takes people, it takes a long time in life to reach a point that you're comfortable being who you are, and particularly when, you know, you fit into lots of categories and no categories at the same time like Naomi does. And it's on that level, I think, having someone like her kicking ass along the way and showing a lot of people, not just people like her. I mean, there aren't many people like her, this is the thing, but for those that are, and even those that aren't, to actually see that, oh man, there's all sorts of different ways that you can just be an awesome person. It's just wonderful to see, and it's great to see young talent. I must admit one thing about tennis myself. I'm not a huge tennis fan, but it's always great to see good new talent coming up in any sport, and she's doing that as well. So, yes, very much enjoying that. That was from yesterday, but especially with everything going on at the Australian Open as well, and all the hardship for the athletes in that as well to come through and win that tournament. It's a special one. Indeed, that was very good. Going back into the chat, who else is in there? We've got Shiro Bear TV, good to see you, from Meguro. Okay, well, that's not far away. It was a gorgeous weather indeed. And nice to see another handle name that I don't totally recognize. So good to have you in the chat, and welcome to the show. As I was saying before, at Mark Kiko Simon, you can ask me topics, do whatever you like. We've got, I think I saw someone else there. In fact, lots of Mr. Cordy Chap comments. But I thought I saw another name there. I did not. In fact, now I feel like going back and like I've missed something. The most wholesome Twitch streamer is Maori. He does traditional Maori carvings on stream. That actually sounds pretty cool. Korg is a pretty nice guy. I don't know who Korg is either, but okay, well that's pretty good. Hi, Tudom and Shiro Bear. Sussex Patrick. That's another handle name I don't recognize. I was actually at risk of getting it wrong. I was actually just watching The Dig, which is from Suffolk, right? Which my UK geography is awful. I should be better at it. But it's funny on the story about finding the huge Saxon burial mound find or whatever. Was that in Sussex? Suffolk, Sussex. This is how I should know, and I don't. But in any case, it just rang a bell. So it's nice to see a handle named Sussex Patrick. And good evening right back at you. And if you're in Japan, I guess it's good evening. If you are in the place of your name, then I guess, good morning if you're in Europe. We've got Subaru the car. Good to see you again. Hello from Akabane. Oh, you're in Akabane. Well, that's not so far away from where I am. And indeed, it was a lovely day today. The Dig, Mr. Cordy Chap. It's a story about the archaeological excavation of the massive Anglo-Saxon gold haul that was kind of found just before the war, I think. Isn't that a game from the 90s? It might be a game from the 90s. I don't know if that's the case. It's Dig Dug. Dig Dug was a game from the 90s. There you go. I know something about games from the 90s. I don't know if there was actually a separate game called The Dig, but yeah, there you go. So, yeah, look, nice to see people rocking in. Do say hello. Do check in. We do have some topics to cover tonight. Isn't that the game where people died? I have no idea. People die on digs, but I don't know if there's a game. No, obviously you're more up on that stuff than me. Anyway, huge shout out to Erin for the awesome edits. I hope you guys did any of you see any of the short edits? Did you notice the theme song I made? I made a new track. Even today I was actually playing around just tonight before watching the Netflix thing. I was I made my first wee sort of loop track in a while. That was kind of going quite well, so I might just render that and put it up later. Might even actually play it at the end of the show if there's some time. As you know, I always have time at the end of the show. Sussex Patrick is in Edoga. I used to live in Edoga. I used to live in Nishikasai, which was actually one of my favorite places to live in, so there you go. And apparently, according to Brianna W., Mr. Cordy Chip is right about the game, so there you go. But yeah. Squirrels. I'm getting distracted. I made a new theme song for my general intro clip for the stuff. I hope you guys noticed it. It was kind of fun. I put a regular hip hop beat, and then I thought I might try to make it. I like the taiko drums that I had on the Creative Commons track, which I've been using for my intro until now. So I thought I might just go and get into GarageBand and find some taiko drums and add taiko drums over a hip hop beat, and I thought it came out quite well. So I was quite chuffed with that. Anyway, Mr. Cordy Chap, wow, okay, that's history. I guess I'm gonna have to go look up. Lysander 45, good to see you, Lysander 45. We've got vaccination for COVID is something you probably won't be able to get whilst you're in the UK. So how you'll get it if when you move to Japan next month remains to be seen. Well, I don't know. I was just seeing on the BBC today, I've got a sister in the UK who's very cynical about the ability of the government there to do anything. But I did see the announcement that they're planning to vaccinate the entire population of the UK by July 31st, which is certainly going to be sooner than we're going to get it here in Japan. I will talk about the schedule today. There is some more discussion, a couple of updates, although it's not totally clear when regular folk like myself are going to be getting it. I mean, good news is that foreign residents are going to get it for free in Japan, and will be included as part of the normal rollout. So that is the good news. The bad news is that it's all being made in the UK and Europe right now and being flown over, so it's not clear when it's going to come in, but I'm going to cover that in the topics. So yes, that's all the setup. Definitely check out the short videos and so on. I did watch a couple of movies just at night during the week. Was sort of catching up. I watched Bliss on Amazon Prime, which kind of sucked. I watched Anonymous, or Anon, I think it was called, also on Amazon Prime. That was better, although the ending kind of sucked, and I had some issues with some aspects of the plot and the story, although overall I thought it was pretty good. And I need a Black Mirror fix, so both of those were kind of Black Mirror-ish, but Anon was better. But I gave it about 3.5 stars. And then I watched Souls, which I was talking about earlier, so Soulful World or whatever, and that was good. That was like 4.5. Pixar did a really good job on that one. John Anderson, good to see you. And yeah, so let's dive in, pardon me, to the topics. And I will do this, and I'll try to present this in a format that it can be recorded. So I'm going to talk and focus on the story and not get distracted, and then I'll come back and I'll look. Certainly if you've got a question or something you want to get my attention, I will scroll back, so at Mark Kiko Simon, so it flashes orange like John Anderson just did, and I'll come back. But let's jump in. So the big news this week, I mean, I really don't want to talk about the Olympics anymore, but how can I avoid it when, of course, we continue to have the never-ending Olympics drama? We had the Olympics minister, LDP cabinet minister, Seiko Hashimoto, who actually, I didn't connect all the dots, but yes, indeed, she was a bronze medalist speed skater, and I think she actually was another type of Olympian as well, multiple sports. And anyway, yeah, so she was really, I suppose, the only candidate that people could consider for the new Olympics minister. The way that it happened was that a committee of prominent sort of athletes and sports administrators met behind closed doors, where they would decide all the candidates, and they'd whittle it down. And apparently they did this without actually asking the candidates if they wanted to be candidates. So they decided behind closed doors, oh, it should be her. And then after they decided that, they said, when they sort of told the press that, oh yes, there's only one candidate, left, but we haven't asked her if she wants the job yet. So the minister herself, who was still being a minister, she was still in government, they went, and the press went in and said, hey, do you know that you're the only person? I guess it was kind of, people could see it coming. As we said last week, there was talk about it going to Maury's friend, who was going to appoint Maury back as an advisor, and that got kind of squashed. So there were a lot of people saying already this is the only person it could be, and indeed she was nominated, and she very promptly said yes, she'll take the job. In order to take the job, she is obviously stepping down as a government minister, and in fact it was then suggested that she should also not remain a member of the LDP, the government party, just in order to avoid the politicization or use of her role as the Olympics lead for political purposes. So she resigned from the LDP, and it all looked like a bit of a win. I haven't included it in here, but there was one slight thing about this Olympics minister. I mean, pretty much like everybody, frankly, especially in the LDP, but certainly in politics, there was a kerfuffle a few years ago, which made a bit of a splash. So yes, as at the 2014 Sochi Olympics, Seiko Hashimoto, she was actually the head of the Japanese Olympics delegation. So you know how all the teams at the Olympics and these things, they'll always have sort of like the chief of the mission, or whatever they call them, who's sort of like is the administrator in charge of the entire thing. So, the sort of the most senior, and this is the sort of role that Mori would play. If Japan was going to a different country for the Olympics, probably Mori would travel with the team as the person in charge of the entire team, the chief administrator. Of course, in Hashimoto-san's case, she started out as an athlete herself, and then she became sort of the senior administrator, going on the tour over to the Olympics in Russia. And Yeah. I suppose that's where this kind of comes into it a little bit. Although, yeah, he didn't help. There was an incident that happened. Apparently, there was a during a party towards the end of the Olympics. There among the celebrities of the Winter Olympics team that was going over to Russia. There were a couple of male ice skaters in particular that were like a bit like idols in Japan. They have their own sort of groupies and their sort of fans who follow around after them. And one of them, Daisuke Takahashi, I think was his name, who's kind of famous and a bit of a heartthrob. So at the time, I guess this is 6 years ago, so she was about 50 years old. There was a party towards the end in Russia being held by the Olympic group, and apparently at the party, in front of everybody, a slightly inebriated head of the mission, Seiko Hashimoto, took it upon herself to sort of plant a couple of kisses on the mouth of the sort of heartthrob ice skating athlete. And apparently photos were everywhere there, and they were picked up by one of the tabloids, and the tabloids said at the time that the head of the Japanese Olympic delegation just sort of drunkenly threw herself upon one of the star athletes and started kissing him. It was kind of a mild form, maybe not even mild. People didn't say. They said there's a sexual harassment in this day and age. The head of a sports delegation, drunkenly, unwelcomingly kissing one of the junior, popular athletes. Probably, I mean, thank heavens it wasn't Mori, I suppose. But should it make a difference? Is it a double standard if it's a woman doing it to a man? In any case. At the time, there was the immediate reaction, and the photos are everywhere. It was sort of like, oh, this is power harassment or sexual harassment. This is a senior administrator abusing their position on the team to take advantage of an athlete. The athlete very awkwardly and with the slightly hostage-looking eyes, sort of looking away, appealing for help, said, no, it's okay. I don't think it was sexual harassment. And the whole episode was kind of put behind at the time. She obviously embarrassed and said that she'd be careful how she'd conduct herself. But of course, the story immediately, as soon as it came out that she was going to be the new head of the Olympics, it immediately came out that, oh yeah, she possibly sexually assault one of the players in front of everybody and photographed in public while drunk. At a party at the Russian Olympics. Is that okay? And while it came up and everyone had a bit of a laugh about it, I suppose. I mean, it's, at least to the extent that the athlete himself says that he's okay. In the end of the day, it came up, but it didn't come up to the extent that anyone thought that there was honestly anyone better for this job. And of course, when they asked her about it, she said, yeah, she's still extremely embarrassed about the whole thing, and it was inappropriately, and she learned, she'll never do that again. So, of course, the inevitable questions came up, and that should have been the end of it. But obviously, this is the LDP, and you can't just leave an opportunity to make an awkward situation worse. Who could do that? So apparently, a fellow member of the LDP thought he'd help out by explaining to the press what he really thought about the Seiko Hashimoto situation, how the press shouldn't be making a fuss about that old sexual assault, sexual harassment allegation from her drunkenly, unwelcomingly, multiple times kissing one of the athletes in the delegation that she was leading at a party. He said that basically this guy Takeshita Takeshita Ging, anyway, a guy from the LDP, he explained, you don't get it. See, the thing about Hashimoto-san is that she's like a dude. She's like one of us. So to her, it's totally natural. She's just like a guy. Of course she wants to go and hug and, kiss all the young, athletes. She's just acting like one of us. And he said, I think it's being a bit tough on her to say that, I feel sorry for everyone saying that that's sexual harassment. She doesn't mean any harm. That's just how she is. I just loved it, just when you think the situation was kind of bad and was kind of awkwardly being put behind, and she just apologized again, and we're about to get on with business, he just came and said, everybody, stop talking about the sexual harassment. She can't help it. She's just like one of us. Yes, so of course, I don't know. He just, it's just amazing how, I swear to God, I think that the movie Brewster's Millions, where like, you know, the guy's just got to spend all the money on purpose and sabotage himself and no one's allowed to know why. I'm just sure that's what the LDP is. I mean, it's just like, he's just saying the worst possible thing. But anyway, we somehow got through all of that, and the thing is, myself included, even knowing that, and even acknowledging that, yeah, there probably is a double standard here, that you know, people are not, certainly, I mean, could you imagine the situation if it was a young female ice skater had been, like, drunkenly, sexually assaulted, basically an unwelcome kiss, but that's what it is nowadays. I mean, you know, if Maury had done that, could you imagine? I mean, you know, there wouldn't be any discussion, and it's probably true to some extent that maybe Hashimoto-san's getting a pass for it, but in the end of the day, there's no one else, and it's awkward enough, and it is now behind us. And I must admit, it's still the thing. I mean, look, regardless of, you know, who's the new captain of the Titanic, fact is, the boat is listing, you know, the iceberg has been hit. I don't see any way that it still is going to make sense, apart from the fact that there's no way the people in Japan are going to be vaccinated, or, you know, that it's going to be safe here. Having 100,000 athletes and administrators from every country in the world come to Japan, come to Tokyo, like, how is this going to work? Unless they do what they did at the Australian Open, I mean, which no one's talking about doing. So I still think that really, in the end of the day, the mission of the New Olympics League should be to find a delicate way to let it all down and cancel the thing. But that's not what's happening. But yeah, never waste a good opportunity to make an awkward situation worse. So that's what's going on with the Olympics, and I sincerely hope that I have nothing to report other than the cancellation of the Olympics going forward. But you know, this is Japan. I'm sure we're going to keep getting more awkward stories about that. Into the comments before going into the next one. Aaron, good to have you in the comments, Aaron. And ooh, indeed, throw peanuts away. Don't worry about that stuff. No comments directed at me. That's good to see. Iraq 299, good to have you back in the comments. And Aaron, nice to see everyone arriving. Don't hesitate to say hello, by the way, indeed, if you are just joining. Let's dive into the second topic that we have for the night, which is the LDP again. I mean, this is just awkward and funny. I think I've talked before about this guy, Toshiro. It's kind of funny. Then we've had like Abe, and we've had like Koizumi and other famous LDP prime ministers. The person who was like the party president, who's basically like the chief organizer for the political party, was kind of not very prominent. You wouldn't really notice them, but for some reason, this guy, Toshihiro Nikai, he's just like, all of a sudden, he's like in the news all the time. He's like demanding, he wants everybody to know that he's the real boss behind the bosses. But it's like the whole idea of that is that you're not supposed to stand out, but he kind of does. Even though he has no actual real authority or power publicly, he likes to sort of talk loudly. And yeah, and the thing is, when he does, again, just like that guy before, he just makes every bad situation worse. And this was just this got covered by the BBC. I only pointed at this in Japanese, and no one seemed to notice it when I did that. It was too easy to hit. It was like hitting a kid, frankly, doing this one. But a couple of days after I tweeted it, some other people started to notice, and this did actually make international news headlines, which is, among the whole theme, the whole issue from the Olympics thing stemming from the idea of participation, 40% composition of Olympics-related boards having women, and the underrepresentation of women in committees and so on. It came up, it was redirected towards the government. And it was pointed out that in many of the deliberative committees within the Diet, that there were no women at all. And basically Nikai came up with a plan to both improve participation of women in these meetings and at the same time ensure that they proceeded in a timely manner and were not slowed down in the way that, you know, all LDP men seem to believe women make meetings take longer. So he figured out the perfect solution, if that's how you see the world, which is that he invited women politicians to sit in and observe these committees going forward, but they would not be allowed to speak in the meetings. So he thought that was a good idea, and he called a press conference to share what a great idea it was. And the BBC and the international press, after they picked their jaws up off the ground, they broadcasted. They did exactly what he did, and he doesn't understand what's the fuss. But that is a thing. that happened. I mean, it's just kind of just amazing how they managed to not read the air as it is on these things. But he did that. That was funny and terrible. Yeah, and there's more. I'm gonna do one more politics story, but let's just mush them together, shall we? Let's do that. So I mentioned the other week how Suga's son, Sugar, makes him sound more gangster if I pronounce it Sugar, I suppose. Sugar's got a son who he's got three sons, but one of those sons who used to work at the communications ministry, where indeed Suga himself used to actually be like a patron of as a political minister. His son went into the private sector after being a bureaucrat, as sometimes happens, and once in the private sector, it doesn't say exactly what his job is, but apparently he went out, he was going out for an expensive dinner at an expensive restaurant, and he did what any person, in a business normally does, which is he calls up the the chief regulators of the business that he is operating in and invites them out for an extremely expensive dinner. During the dinner, apparently, he also decided to talk specifically about the way that he's regulated. This is a new development, and apparently during the original questioning of the bureaucrats who attended this dinner, they said that, oh yes, we knew the person and we thought it'd be good to go out to dinner, and we didn't think there was anything untoward, and we just had a very nice chat and there was nothing involved. And then it turns out that apparently one of the people at the dinner, I don't know how this happened. I don't know if this was like a junior bureaucrat that went along or someone opportunist, but apparently someone thought it'd be a good idea to record the entire conversation that took place at the dinner. So in the parliamentary committee, which was explaining this, they said, so did you talk about the way that you're regulated? And the bureaucrats said, the chief bureaucrats involved in this, in charge of the broadcast arm of the Ministry of Communications, said, oh, no, we didn't talk about the actual policy that he's actually being regulated by. However, in the full recording, they actually recorded them talking specifically about this. So they sort of caught them red-handed, to which they responded to the committee. I have no recollection. I mean, it's my voice. That's me on the recording, but I have no recollection of saying that. And apparently then the investigative committee of the LDP decided, well, that sounds good enough for me, case closed. And they said, okay, the Prime Minister, no wrongdoing was done because there's no conclusive evidence, even though they had a voice recording of these bureaucrats basically being bribed and directly consulted about being regulated by the Prime Minister's son. So yeah, when they explained to Parliament that in spite of that, they said they don't remember. So what can we do? Then the opposition basically threw a fit, and they said, well, we're holding up every committee until you actually give us a satisfactory explanation. And apparently, instead of doing a satisfactory explanation, the LDP thought, well, you know what? Yeah, we should just reassign these bureaucrats immediately to different roles. So they're still fighting over having another investigation into this. But in the meantime, the government said that, oh, we don't have to reinvestigate. This is just very embarrassing. We're just going to reassign them and change their jobs. Bear in mind, they're not fired. They're just going to get reassigned. Because basically bureaucrats are unfireable. But yeah, that's all happening. And then they asked the Prime Minister, well, aren't you partially responsible for this? I mean, your son did bribe a government, official in the ministry that you used to represent, and he knew exactly what he was doing because he used to work there too. To which the Prime Minister yesterday responded to Parliament, oh, my he's a totally separate person, nothing to do with me. So he thought that was okay too. So, this is kind of a situation where, again, a situation that was already kind of awkward and could have been handled if they had just kind of come clean the first time. Just the fact they gave a patently ridiculous answer and then the LDP pretended it was okay. Just showed, I mean, the parade, the conga line of people, corrupt politicians going to jail right now, and the fact it's already starting to actually directly hit the Prime Minister at the moment, it's pretty awful. I mean, it's just amazing. To me, this is this is good drama stuff. So you know what? I don't know that this single scandal on its own in isolation would necessarily be enough to bring down the Prime Minister. I mean, it's a terrible judgment by the son of the Prime Minister. But, just for being the Prime Minister's son, do you have to resign? Well, not really. But then you add it up with everything else going on at the moment, and it's pretty bad. I mean, I guess the only thing really protecting Suga right now is that there is literally no one who is better. There is no one who's clean. But again, how does Japan not have an opposition? So yeah, that's what's been happening in political stuff. So that was something. Yeah, more awfulness coming up in a moment. But into the comments, and indeed, Paragoti, they are a special breed, and that's why I like to talk about them. I see Dan H had a comment, but let me just check if there's anyone before that. Which there is not. So Dan H, how's it going? Hello. What is that because bureaucrats know where their bodies are buried? Absolutely. Well, there's two aspects to it. There's multiple aspects to it. Bureaucrats in Japan. Practically speaking, it is impossible to fire people in Japan. You cannot fire people. In fact, the joke is, I mean, it's only a quasi joke that you actually have to catch them literally breaking the law, like burning down the building to be able to fire them. And even then, I remember saying that as a joke with my Japanese labor lawyer friends in a conversation once, and they were like, no, there was a case recently where someone was actually caught red-handed stealing and convicted of stealing, and they were still reinstated by the labor courts. So for a start, just even regular folk, you can't fire them, let alone the elite, the bureaucrats. Who Japan is kind of funny. It's kind of a hybrid between China and a democracy, in the sense that there's a democracy that looks structurally like a democracy of other constitutional democracies around the world. You know, there are elections and proportional representation, but at the same time, where most of the laws and policy that determine how the country will run are actually, you know, done by the elected representatives who are there to decide what the laws are. And this is, if you watch Yes Minister, I mean, you'll understand. I mean, people understand how most laws actually get made by bureaucrats and get handed up to politicians to do. But politicians theoretically are steering the ship. In Japan, the pretense of politicians being they're kind of accountable in the sense that they'll change roles to take responsibility for bureaucrats, but there's no pretense that they are actually running things. It's all run by bureaucrats, and bureaucrats, it's absolutely true, entrench themselves on top of being unfireable, and frankly having longer tenure than the politicians. So politicians are afraid of them. They don't want to get. They know that having a powerful bureaucrat underneath them can do much more harm to them and their political careers, which are temporary and subject to publicity and accountability. In that way, they absolutely keep dossiers on people. And when you see these political frenzies that happen around politicians sometimes, where all the media like suddenly goes for someone all at once and all their life history comes out at once in the media, that's almost always orchestrated, so almost certainly orchestrated by bureaucrats who are safe from publicity and who feed the stories to the media and to different political factions or whatever to orchestrate these huge scandals that can happen. So yeah, they're absolutely unfireable, and they're a protected class in that way. So it is that they know where their bodies are buried, but they're actually also the ones actually running things, and they have tenure. They're like university professors, is a good way to put it. They're sort of sexist, out of touch, unaccountable university professors who have control of the media and the government. So it's pretty awful if you think about it. And this is where there are some politicians like Ichiro Ozawa and so on who have made a big deal that you can't really take power from the LDP unless you also actually take away the power of the bureaucrats, which prop the LDP up and are part of that structure. And that's why when the Democrats got into power 10 years ago, the first thing that they did was they called each bureaucrat into a gymnasium and they started slashing their budget and their power in front of them. And that went well for about 6 months, and then basically people started poking at the wheels of the Hatoyama government until they basically got him to resign, and then Naoto Kan reversed the whole thing. That's why I don't like Naoto Kan. So the bureaucrats in Japan are unbelievably powerful, and that's why they're unfireable. To YY, evening, probably Kono has his stock rising as preferred PM. You mean Kono? Yeah, well, his stock is rising as a popular politician. That said, I mean, in the end of the day, becoming prime minister relies on having everyone in the LDP voting for you to be prime minister. And while his stock is definitely rising, he's definitely not got the numbers within the LDP to be voted by the LDP as the prime minister. But certainly he's been doing an impressive job, and it's almost like they've been assigning him to all the most difficult jobs on purpose to sabotage him, and he's been pulling it off. And he's doing, as we'll talk about in a few minutes, what he's doing with the vaccinations right now, the current toughest job. So absolutely. Paragoti, what's become of Edono CDP? You're actually hopeful for a time. Yeah. So he is not the head. What is the name of the head? sorry, the head of the Constitutional Democrats. Oh, you know what? He is in charge, but they're kind of sharing the title. But basically, I mean, they've just sort of faded into the background and into disorganization. And again, they should be all over this, but I've been complaining too much for years. And honestly, I'm not such a big fan of Edino anyway. Edino really destroyed the credibility of the CDP when they ran it the last election, apart from the fact that, you know, like, for example, the fact that they merged with the other half of the Democratic Party that ran away, and then they remerged with them. But when they remerged, all the members of that party ran away, and then when they went into the elections, they did electoral cooperation with the Communist Party, which, while that makes technical sense, you don't want to split the left-wing vote, so consolidating the left-wing vote, having the communists agreeing not to run against CDP members, probably did make sense for giving them the best shot of getting the seat over over the LDP. The problem is the moment that you're actually cooperating with the communists to help them get elected and to get elected yourself, that becomes a very easy big bat to hit the CDP with. You know, and in the end of the day, you have to weigh up the costs and benefits of it. But I think my assessment is that yes, the idea of them being an electable government when they're cooperating with the communists, which, by the way, communists seem like lovely people in Japan. I've got nothing against them personally. But it does take away your credibility as a feasible Japanese government when you've got, you know, a party that's committed to wanting to kick out all the American military, and various other sort of things. So they've just kind of failed. And Dan H, you mean a British democracy? It's very similar to Yes Minister. It's very similar to Britain. But I don't know. Even the pretense of political control is completely absent in Japan. You know, I think in the UK, people at least put a big show on pretending that they're in charge and that they're making the decisions and that they're running the economy. But yeah, there isn't even the pretense. In fact, I mean, it's not quite so bad now, but there was a time in the early 2000s where government ministers being asked questions about policy actually responded on such an important question of policy. I'll have to defer to the bureaucrats. You know, the opposite of what they're supposed to say. It's basically coming straight out. So yeah, it's just it's a complete mess. Dan H, the only opposition party in Japan is the Japanese Communist Party, it seems to me. Yeah, I mean, well, they have the luxury of having a lot of dedicated followers that actually give them good donations or whatever, so they're well backed and they've got a solid foundation of support, and they're never going to be government, and they know it. And they're okay. So they never have to worry about speaking some kind of truth that's going to come back and you know, and undermine them when they're in power. And again, nobody bribes them because they know that there's no need to. So in a way, they are kind of like the cleanest, and that gives them the freest hand to say what they think. But at the same time, it's partly just because their ideology is obviously not really valid anymore, and arguably never was, and the fact that they're tied to the 1960s anti-defense treaty with America movement and the groups associated with that, like the Japanese Red Army terrorist group. I mean, you know, you're just never going to be able to get quite over that. Wingstar, good to see Wingstar there in the comments. I'm going to move on to the next story, which is this one right here about hair. Not a problem that I have, but specifically speaking, apparently a high school in Osaka had a rule, and this is something, this is not common. First thing I definitely want to say right away is that it's not common for schools to have rules about hair color and whatnot, and when they do, it's most often private schools and so on. However, there is this public school in Osaka Prefecture, Kaifukan Prefectural High School in Habikino, Osaka Prefecture. They did have a school rule that all the kids are supposed to have black hair. And the thinking behind this rule is, well, that anyone who doesn't have brown hair, you know, it is kind of popular and trendy, particularly for young adults who are sort of out in the world and free for the first time in their early 20s. It's kind of popular for Japanese to get a mild peroxide that will just make their hair slightly brown, or just give it a bit of a tint or whatever of color, and then, you know, people like that. It actually makes them look like they could be a bit sun bleached, or it could be a little bit, you could have a little bit of exotic heritage or whatever. And it's kind of popular and trendy to do that. But of course, schools not wanting to foster the idea of their students, you know, doing anything in the direction of appealing of how different they are, or trying to get one up. The philosophy is actually egalitarian. It's this idea that you don't want people to make themselves look more fashionable or attractive by allowing them to do things like wear jewelry or dye their hair or do stuff like that. So they have these rules. In a way, the rule that everyone has to have black hair is probably founded from the mentality that you're not supposed to dye your hair, which is the normal rule in high schools in New Zealand and other countries. But in Japan, because they couldn't even conceive of normal people not having black hair when they made the rule, they have a rule that hair has to be black. And apparently this goes to the point that even for Japanese people whose hair is naturally brown or a different color, including an extreme case like more than a decade ago when an exchange student, an actual blonde-haired exchange student, was forced to dye their hair. And forgetting about how people can actually be sensitive to the dyes that are used for hair dye and suffer all sorts of scalp problems and skin problems and whatnot. In any case, a girl at a high school whose hair was naturally brown was told that she had to dye her hair black. And apparently, she struggled with it. She reacted to the dye, and in the end of the day, she stopped attending classes basically from the stress of being forced to dye her hair artificially to be black, and that caused her to drop out of high school. And years after, she filed a lawsuit basically for the against the prefecture, because there's a prefectural school, for the suffering caused basically by being forced to dye her hair black and it leading to her dropping out of school. So the Osaka District Court did grant her compensation for the mental suffering and stress that she followed. However, they also said that the rule itself that the school had, forcing students to dye their hair black, was reasonable. So they actually said that it's constitutional for schools to force their kids to dye their hair artificially to be black, to make them look like the expected image of what Japanese people look like. However, at the same time, they acknowledged that her being forced to quit the school and the suffering that she suffered led to her getting a $21,000 payout in compensation, which I suppose when you think about the amount of impact that dropping out of high school early could have on your life, $21,000 really probably wouldn't quite cover that. Japan is a country where you don't get a lot of money from litigation. So if this had happened in America and she'd dropped a cup of hot coffee on top of all of that, you could imagine that the award would have been a lot bigger. So in a way, it's good that she got compensated. At the same time, the fact that it asserted a rule which basically is racist. I mean, straight up, it's actually a regulation against being not only not Japanese, but the other thing is, there are particularly young kids naturally often have quite light brown hair in Japan, and sometimes they're not necessarily half. The girl in this case, I don't think it says if she was half or if she had an international parent. In the end of the day, she just had naturally brown hair, and the thing is, Japanese have that. So in the end of the day, the kind of being hazed for the natural color of your hair. I mean, again, it doesn't happen often, but this happened at this school. I mean, I think if that happened, I couldn't imagine it happening in Tokyo, honestly. And if it did, where I am, I would react extremely adversely. I don't know. I still think this should be appealed. It's just a ridiculous case. But yes, that is a thing that happens still this week. So still the problem, and the fact that it happened in a public high school, is just ridiculous. So that's a thing that happened. More comments up here. I see Paragoti. Oh, okay, so we saw those comments there. Quinn Ranked, if there is no pretense, then why do people try to take political office? What's the benefit? Quinn Ranked, well, so the thing about political office is it's really about getting money for your constituency. So in the end of the day, when you're a politician who gets put in charge of the transport ministry, basically the quid pro quo is that, if you want to get a couple of roads built for which will be contracted to the construction companies that paid for your election campaign. Yeah, the bureaucrats will toss you a bone if you're in charge of the ministry. That at the end of the day, the ministers do actually have to rubber stamp the legislation and put it to Parliament and present it smoothly and whatnot. So the bureaucrats need people that will do this work for them, and in exchange for that, they will absolutely direct government-funded projects towards the home prefectures. And help these people get re-elected. So when you're a politician, the expectation in Japan often is that you're going to bring some bacon back home And yeah, that's the whole idea of being a politician. Is you get in, you basically sit, you sleep all day in Parliament. If you get on a couple of good committees, The Distinguished Gentleman, if you've seen the Eddie Murphy movie, it's like that. You get on some good committees, you get some good titles or whatever, and you send the money back, and you get to do that for as long as you can hold on to the position, knowing that there are other people who are expecting their turn as soon as possible. Who agitate, and there are bureaucrats and factions that are agitating to sort of get that money back. And this is the thing as well. If you're in a faction, you'll try to direct funds and taxpayer money towards the other people in your factions as well. So yeah, they all sort of jostle for those positions. But it's really all about just getting the money, getting the tax money back to your hometowns. That's really what it's about. And yeah, they get paid well enough, and they if you cooperate with the bureaucrats, it can work out quite well for them. But I don't understand why anyone would want to be a politician in Japan, or frankly anywhere else, but it's particularly cynical in Japan. Dan H., the McDonald's coffee case was a lot more complicated and actually darker. Indeed, I know, I know. And I've seen I've seen whole documentaries about that, and yes, it's a cliche for an outrageous overpayment, which is the way that, frankly, McDonald's PR wanted it to come out, and has been adopted that way. I know. I do know that case was actually terrible, and the payment was justified, and it's not that simple. But the point being, in Japan, apart from the cases where the government's actually directly obstructed justice, like for example the Minamata case, where you actually gave mercury poisoning to an entire town. And the government actually blocked the silicon factory that was using the mercury for processing and actually pumping it straight out into a bay where people were eating all the fish, protected them from prosecution. So that's an extreme case, but even generally, even in legitimate, like punching someone in the face in the street, the damages that you will get will be pretty limited, and you've almost got to have signed receipts for everything that you'll get. So that's the point. As a litigation jurisdiction, it's not a place that people get large awards. Next story. More ways. Heaven forbid children have anything other than black hair. There's this common thing I've brought up now and again, that with an increasingly elderly society, it seems that the degree of agitation people feel towards the sound that children make does seem to go up. And here we have a story where the demand for maps showing the degree to which there are the annoying voices of noisy small people. It's kind of funny. On the one hand, the government is like blaming women for like not outputting enough babies, and how they're not trying hard enough and being selfish and so on. The society is like criticizing the fact that there aren't tax-paying young people being made by women, and at the same time, the elderly people who are like criticizing this whole demographic collapse that Japan is going through are also at the same time voting against schools being put up in neighborhoods, or kindergartens being put up in neighborhoods, because because now that they're retired and at home all day, they don't want to listen to kids. Can you imagine in the 1960s, when most of Japan was like young, how much noise kids must have made when basically the elderly today were young? And yet no, show. Actually, I think that's kind of funny as moderator that I can't. Okay, I totally got distracted now. But Aaron, I'm sorry. I don't know what does that. I think it's the multiple emojis triggers that, and I can't make it show. So sorry about that. But everyone can see on the screen anyway. But anyway, yes. So the very same people who are like voting, demanding maps of neighborhoods so they don't want to live where there are kids, are at the same time, they came from a generation that was full of kids, and kids who were like smoking cigarettes and like shoplifting and doing. Kids in the 60s and 70s were like so much worse. If you look at movies or any of the pop culture from the 60s or 70s, you'll get a sense of how. This is the age where Japan produced terrorist groups. It's where there were like student riots, including, raiding the parliament, burning down Tokyo University. Kids in the 60s and 70s were punks. They were absolutely punks. And yet those punks grew up and now they hate kids. Or maybe they just remember themselves. I don't know, but it's ridiculous that these things happen and that there is a demand for it, but there is, and it's horrible. There's actually a term in Japanese called rogai, damage caused by the elderly. And this was actually a term that was used when Mori was, talking about, discrimination towards women. And people said this is another case of just damage by the elderly. And he actually had the nerve when resigning to say this sort of bullying towards old people is unacceptable. But that was that is a thing that's happening. And you know what? It's bad here, but Japan is by no means the only country with a elderly baby boom bubble demographic issue. And this is the future of probably a lot of other places. It's crazy, but that is a thing that is happening. In foreigner news, some positive news in a way that Japan has been Japan's whole immigration, particularly deportation and the refugee system, lots of aspects of Japanese immigration have been criticized on a human rights basis. Apart from the fact that Japan only accepts less than 1% of all refugee applications, when most countries, the most generous countries, I think I saw a graph, it might even be in here, the most generous countries accept generally about, like Germany accepts 50% of refugee applications. Britain and America accept about 20%. Japan accepts less than 1%. And assuming that even if you think about the easier countries that let people in, even if they're, they can't totally prove it, and then you've got the countries that are being maybe a little bit tougher. I mean, Japan is clearly turning away legitimate refugees, but you've got that as one problem. Another problem is that when Japan turns down these applications, or for other reasons, like, for example, criminal behavior or overstaying a visa or whatever, Japan will basically put people into immigration detention. And in immigration detention, which is like prison except without constitutional protections or rights. There are people who have been held in immigration detention who, for example, the Japanese government wants people to pay for themselves. They don't want to pay for the flights, and they want for them to arrange for their own travel outside of the country to go to the countries which often they're afraid to go back to. And because of this, there are some people who refuse to cooperate, who refuse to be put on a flight, and they stay in immigration detention indefinitely for decades. And the number of suicides and deaths that have happened in immigration detention in recent years has been highlighted multiple times by Amnesty International as a real problem. NHK didn't cover any of this when they said this rule, by the way, when they put the story up. But frankly, the horrific conditions in Japanese immigration detention are causing Japan's international image to come down, and really it deserves every bit of bad press that it gets about that. So they're actually amending the law to do a couple of things. They are trying to, one, if you have family members in Japan, they will allow you to wait out your deportation coming through with your family. You won't have to go into immigration detention. That's the first thing that they're doing. The second thing is that they are going to shorten the period that you cannot return to Japan. Right now, if you're deported, you can't return for 5 years. However, if people are cooperative and they pay for their own flights out of Japan and they cooperate with the deportation order, under the new rules, they would be allowed to come back after 12 months. In any case, they're making it easier to, in order to get people to voluntarily cooperate with deportation and to avoid the hardship caused to families and so on while people are going through deportation hearings, they're going to allow people to stay at home more and to return to the country sooner. So that is some good news there, a little bit of humanity, which is good to see. Some people talked about Kono before. Oh, before we get into this, hold on that into the comments. Dan H, do you think their baby boom, do you think there could be a baby boom after COVID? Don't know. Well, certainly there was a news story tonight that there have been something like 200, in fact, what was it? It must have been 24,000 weddings confirmed cancelled or delayed during the COVID period. So, the Wedding Association, which keeps statistics on this, has pointed out probably they might have just gone for alternate arrangements and not had ceremonies. But certainly it has impacted the number of marriages. Of course, babies can happen, obviously, irrespective of that. But that's one thing. My personal opinion, I don't know how it's going to be in other places. People talk about how after World War II there was a big baby boom because people were happy to be back home and able to interact. I suppose the relief of people being able to be social again. There could be a baby boom, but there again, when you have it for 12 months, the toll it's taking on young people, particularly, people in early 20s and whatnot, and the way it sort of has affected people's mental health and their social ability to socialize with people and so on. And understanding how not only are there fewer marriages, but there's stories that you hear about more divorces happening as well, or likely to happen when this comes off. I mean, I don't know. It could be totally the opposite. Who knows? Who knows? I mean, Japan needs more babies one way or the other. But you know what? Given the employment problems and so on that have happened, and the increased economic instability resulting from COVID, and all of that stress and everything else, I really have trouble seeing how COVID could connect to another baby boom myself, here or anywhere else, frankly. But you never know, it could work out. So babies can happen. You never know. So have I been hacked? Yes. It went off into Twitter somehow and I couldn't get it back, but all fixed anyway. So Dan H, I don't know. I mean, I guess we'll see, but I suspect it will not connect to being a baby boom, but you never know. Black Tengu, there was a baby boom, of course, during COVID, of sorts, during COVID in Greece. Well, congrats on the Greeks. I guess they're living up to the reputation of finding an opportunity. I don't know, maybe it reinforces predilections towards making or not making babies. I think the sense in Japan is the population decline has accelerated, and I don't know if it's going to bounce back, but we'll see. So anyway, vaccines. So what's happening? The second flight of Pfizer vials, not the pills, is arriving tomorrow, and Kono's explaining that will account for something like 80,000 doses in total, which will be given out to medical workers. Then he also mentioned that because apparently the manufacturing capacity of Pfizer in Europe, apart from the fact that Europe's basically hijacking all of the deliveries of the stuff at the moment, they are building extra capacity to manufacture, which will come online in May. But until May, he said, people are going to have to manage their expectations about how many vaccines are going to be available in Japan, and that they will probably start first of all with medical workers, and then after that they'll have to do probably step by step with like people over 100, followed by people over 95. He was asked about what about people with preconditions or whatever that that are at heightened risk, like diabetes and whatnot, and he said, well, the problem is the government doesn't have a database of who those people are. So he said it would be up to the prefectures only people to apply for that, and for prefectures to sign off on that. But based on what they can plan for right now and the limited number of doses available, it's going to take a long time. They won't really be able to get started until May. And then it will only be with the very elderly. So we're really talking at the moment that it's going to be probably for someone like myself. It's probably going to be 5 or 6 months, which is why the UK is saying that they could vaccinate everybody by July 31st. I mean, that's great for them. It looks like they're probably going to get it faster than in Japan. But again, I mean, Kono's doing, it seems, a good job. He's being transparent. He's saying that as soon as they can give concrete schedules, they will do it. And right now they're working at setting up the infrastructure to be able to distribute it. So that's pretty good. Black Tengu, Britain are hijacking all the vaccines. Oh, that's right, because they signed the deal with AstraZeneca first, right? I think that was the thing. Yeah, I mean, everyone's scrambling. It's basically like toilet paper in a supermarket right now, I think, with vaccines. So yeah, that's what's happening with the vaccine schedule, and they're going to be vaccinating foreigners as well, so that's cool. The Enios, the biggest gas station chain in Japan, is preparing for hydrogen at the gas stations. Like I've talked about, it's relatively easy to convert with existing infrastructure, and the Japanese government's been preparing for this for a long time. So the reason we can do this in Japan and not in America is that it requires government infrastructure investment and support, which in America they won't even fill in potholes, so or repair the electricity grids. And you can see how that's working out. In Japan, they've actually been building ahead for having hydrogen infrastructure for a long time now. So it means Japan's going to have different sorts of cars with fuel cells. But it's kind of cool that you're actually going to be able to have these everywhere using existing fossil fuel infrastructure. You're just going to be able to convert it over into clean energy. So that's pretty cool. And final story. Second to final story. The Bank of Japan is going to test digital currency. I'm voting for Doge. Did you say Doge or Dog? I always say in my head Dogecoin, but I don't know if that's the right way to pronounce it. But that's my voters for Japan's digital currency. I don't really know how that works. I mean, I definitely look at the people who bought Bitcoin at like $4, and now it's like $44,000 of Bitcoin. I don't know how that works exactly, but yeah, they're doing quite well. Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see. I know central banks are experimenting with this. It'll be really, there is an opportunity for Japan to sort of jump ahead if they do jump into this. So it'll be interesting to see what sort of a test the Bank of Japan does, and if there'll be sort of mainstream use of digital currency. And finally, the YouTube space, which I have used multiple times and have enjoyed. They've all been closed because of the COVID situation, and for nearly a year now. And I guess particularly when you think of the one in Tokyo, it's in Roppongi Hills. It's in a prime piece of real estate, and it's not being used, and it's enormous. So yeah, they've decided to close them all down, which is a shame. But at the same time, YouTube is sort of getting so big and so mainstream now. I think their purpose of sort of encouraging all the amateur video makers to skill up, to level up, is probably surpassed now. Nowadays, frankly, people who are starting on YouTube now, like from scratch, are starting at a pretty high level. It's always increasing. It is a shame, but it was always nice being able to go and shoot a video in there now and again. I've done a few, and it was always pretty cool. It was always kind of a challenge as well. I definitely screwed up the technical stuff a few times, and it took a lot of time and was stressful, but it was kind of good. It was a good experience. So I'll pull one out tonight for the YouTube space in Roppongi. It was a shame, but on to better things. And that's all the stories for tonight. So I think we're coming up exactly on an hour. So I am on time, which I'm proud of. Got a bit distracted, got hacked in the middle of the show. Stuff happens. There was a flock of pigeons, but what can you do? Yeah, the drama of what's going on in Japan just never ends. But one step forward, multiple steps back. That is the show for tonight. Hope that you're all well. It is at least good weather at the moment. If you have hay fever, you're probably getting it pretty bad in Tokyo right now. So look on the bright side. Now you're not the only ones wearing masks. Everyone is. You don't have to be self-conscious about it. If you can get shots, get your shots, get your vaccinations. It won't stop you getting it, of course, but it'll be good to be protected from it if you get it. And yeah, everybody stay cool. Final one, Brianna W. Do I think cryptocurrency will become popular in Japan due to mistrust in the government? You've seen people stateside cite that as a reason to rely on it. I think people are interested in, I know lots of Japanese people who see it just as a good way to invest, and it's kind of people who are interested in it on a hobby basis. People, I guess, you know what? It's probably slightly different to America. In Japan, there is an enormous cash economy. There are people. You think of the water trade, the night trade of women who have day jobs but go and get a bit of extra money at night, working in hostess bars, pouring men drinks, and so on. There's an enormous black sort of cash economy which the government sort of is trying to eliminate and trying to tax at the moment by getting rid of cash. And I think the idea of being able to, with a safe non-cash digital currency, that would appeal to a lot of people, being able to pay in that way, in a way that's hard to trace. There again, the fact that the Bank of Japan is looking at setting up probably a central ledger-based cryptocurrency, it means that it would be a different type of cryptocurrency. There are different types of blockchains, including there are ones with distributed ledgers where basically nobody can tell what the money's been used for, and there are ones with centralized ledgers, which is where a Bank of Japan could track all the transactions and charge them tax. And I'm pretty sure they're probably going to go for a central ledger, not a distributed ledger, in which case the benefits, for example, for illicit use, or for avoiding tax, or for drug dealing or stuff like that might appeal would be gone. So yeah, in terms of broad appeal, I don't really know. Japanese, I think to the extent it could become a substitute for the way that cash is used, it might be popular, but there again, the Bank of Japan is clearly not looking to use it in that way, so I don't know, it could happen. But yeah, hey Sergeant Bilko, you're welcome, and thank you everybody. Diggins Konto, excellent to see you in the chat as well, and Christopher Luke. Thanks for joining tonight. Yeah, I'm going to leave it there tonight. Have a good week, everybody. Stay safe. And remember to like if you liked. It does help the show. I do appreciate it. And have a good week. Boom. Peace. And thank you to the moderator, Erin, for moderating, even though she couldn't moderate herself. And I certainly couldn't moderate her. But thank you again for editing awesome last week. And there'll be some more shorts coming up this week. So check out those. And see you later. Boom. Peace. Any stream. Do I want to end? Yes, we will end.